Have you ever wondered how the world become one big marketplace? How a product made in China ends up in the US? Or how technology connects us across oceans in just seconds? In our video presentation, we take you on a journey through the evolution of global trade, from the ancient Silk Road to the modern-day global economy. We'll explore how technology, trade policies, and global institutions shape the world we live in today. But it's not all smooth sailing. What happens when economies clash? When the rich benefit at the expense of the poor? And when the environment pays the price for unchecked growth? Join us as we dive deep into the impacts of globalization.
Mabuhay everyone! Today we're discussing the globalization of world economics. My name is Gian Grace A. Mansog, and joining me are Dan Briggs Duron, Ace Manlapao, and John Paulo Ramos. Together, we'll explore how economic globalization has shaped our world. We'll go through its history, major players, and the impact it has on our countries, including the Philippines. Let's begin. Before we dive into details, let's go over what you're able to achieve by the end of discussion. We have 4 key objectives, which that number 1, define economic globalization. You'll learn how countries' economies are super connected na talaga through trade, services, and capital. We'll break down what globalization really means. Not just yung idea na nag-exchange sila ng goods internationally. Number 2, identify the key actors facilitating economic globalization. We'll check out the big players in this process, yung mga governments, multinational companies, and institutions like International Monetary Fund and World Trade Organization. Number 3, narrate a brief history of global market integration in the 20th century, from Silk Road to the Galleon trade, and then later on, yung mga system na like gold standard and Bretton Woods system. You'll see how the world's market became super connected like a one global economy. And lastly, articulate your stance on global economic integration. By the end, we'll ask you to share your own thoughts, like globalization is really beneficial for everyone, or may mga countries and people na naiiwan behind. You'll have the knowledge to make a smart judgments for this. And we made this presentation para mas madaling maintindihan yung key ideas so you can think critically about how globalization shape our world today. So, ready na ba kayo? Let's go! So, the first topic is understanding economic globalization. Economic globalization is a term that the International Monetary Fund uses to describe how economies around the world are becoming more connected. Think of it like this. Countries are trading more with each other, sending goods, services, and money across borders, more easily than ever before. This is a result of human creativity and technology. For example, new ways of communicating, faster transport, and the internet have all made it easier to do business across countries. Now, here's the tricky part. The tricky part is figuring out how much of this integration is actually happening. Like, when we say countries are getting more connected, paano natin i-measure yon? At what point masasabi natin na trade has really increased? It's not always easy to define, and different people and organizations might have slightly different takes on it. Still, even though there are debates about what exactly counts as economic globalization, one thing is clear. It's changing the world economy drastically. Let's look at some numbers to illustrate this. According to the IMF or International Monetary Fund, in 1980, trade, meaning the buying and selling of goods and services, made up about 42.1% of the world's total economy by 2007. That number had jumped up to 62.1%. This means that a lot more money was being exchanged between countries. It's not just the trade that's growing. Investments are too. In 1982, foreign investments, money that countries or companies invest in business in other countries, amounted to 57 billion US dollar by 2015. This figure shot up to 1.76 trillion dollar. That's a massive increase in just a few decades, and it's all happening in one lifetime. Now, let's tackle technology impact. It's not just trade that has grown, pati yung paraan ng trading natin nagbago rin. Everything happens way faster now thanks to technology. Like supercomputers can do millions of stock markets transactions in just seconds. This is what we call high frequency trading. Even the stuff we buy and sell has changed. Imagine 10 years ago, bumibili tayo ng libro or music album. Pupunta pa tayo sa store to buy physical books and CDs. Pero ngayon, you can just download it on your devices and just download the book or an e-reader. Or you can buy music on digital platform, you know? So, both the way we trade and the things we trade have totally evolved. So, this lesson will look into how this process of economic globalization come about. We'll explore also who benefits from it, because let's face it, no, people and countries gain more than the others. We'll also look at who might be getting left behind in this globalized system. Now, next na magdi-discuss for this topic is si Mr. Ace Manlapao.
International trading system. International trade isn't a new concept. One of the oldest known trading systems was the Silk Road. This was a network of land routes that connected China to parts of what we now call the Middle East and Europe. It was named after one of the most valuable items traded along this route, silk, which was especially prized in those regions. The Silk Road wasn't just one road. It was a whole network of trade routes that traders used to move goods between countries. It started around 130 BCE when the Chinese Han Dynasty opened and trade with the West. It stayed active for centuries until 1453 CE when the Ottoman Empire shut it down. However, even though the Silk Road connected different countries, it wasn't truly global trade because it didn't include routes across ocean like to the Americas. So when did full globalization, where trade connected all major continents, actually start? Historians Denis Oplin and Arturo Giraldes say that true globalization began in 1571. This was when the galleon trade started connecting Manila in the Philippines with Acapulco in Mexico. This trade route was the first connection between the Americas and Asia, and it had a major impact on all countries involved. For Filipinos, this is a super important part of history. It's amazing to think that economic globalization, as we know it today, actually started right here in the Philippines. Our country became one of the key players in the global trade network back then. The galleon trade took place during a time called the Age of Mercantilism, which lasted from the 16th centuries to the 18th century. During this period, many European countries were competing with each other to sell as many goods as possible. The goal was to make their country richer by building up what we now call monetary reserves, basically the country's savings. To protect their own goods from competition, These countries, mostly monarchies, use all sorts of strategies. They impose high tariffs or taxes on imported goods to make foreign products more expensive. They also banned their colonies from trading with other nations, so the colonies could only trade with their ruling country. Plus, they controlled trade routes to, to dictate how and where goods were sold, and they even subsidized exports, meaning they financially supported businesses selling abroad to help them stay competitive. Even though mercantilism was a global trade system, it had a lot of restriction meant to give some countries while keeping others out. By explaining it like this, we can see that mercantilism was all about building wealth through trade, but with strict rules to control who could benefit. Countries weren't just trading freely, they were focused on protecting their own economies while competing with others to gain the upper hand. The gold standard and Bretton Woods system. In 1867, several powerful countries, including the United States and some European nations, started using something called the gold standard. This was a system where all currencies were valued based on a fixed amount of gold. The idea came from the United Kingdom, and the goal was to make international trade easier and more consistent. At the time, each country would know the value of their money in relation to gold, making trade across borders more predictable. They all agreed on this in an international meeting in Paris. However, the gold standard wasn't perfect. One big issue was that each country had to have a certain amount of gold in their reserves to back up their currency. While it made trade simpler, it also made the money supply super restrictive. This became a huge problem during World War I, when countries were spending massive amounts of money on their military efforts and eventually ran out of gold. Because of this, they had to abandon the gold standard, and their currencies started to float, meaning they were no longer tied to gold. After the war, many countries wanted to return to the gold standard, but it was difficult. The world was in the middle of an economic disaster known as the Great Depression, which started in the 1920s and lasted through the 1930s. This was the worst economic downturn in modern history. Economists later argued that the gold standard made the situation even worse because it limited how much money a country could print and put into circulation. Since governments could only issue money based on the amount of gold they had, it restricted their ability to spend and stimulate the economy. An economic historian named Barry Uchengrid suggested that the United States started to recover from the Depression when it finally abandoned the gold standard, without the need to back up the dollar with gold. The US government had more flexibility to spend money to help the economy recover. Other countries also followed this strategy, especially during World War II. By the 1970s, the gold standard was basically gone. Today, we use fiat currencies which aren't backed by gold or any physical asset. Their value is based on confidence in a country's economy and how they compare to other currencies. This system gives government a lot more control over their economies since they can decide how much money to circulate depending on what's needed to stabilize or grow the economy. But when the US completely disconnected the dollar from gold in the early 1970s, it caused some serious problems. The stock markets crashed and this led to a situation called stagflation. This is when there both high inflation and economic stagnation. Economists using old Keynesian models didn't expect this because they thought high inflation and high unemployment couldn't happen at the same time. To sum it up, moving away from the gold standard gave governments more control over their money supply, but it also brought new challenges like inflation and economic instability. Rise of neoliberalism and the Washington Consensus. Back in the 1970s and the 1980s, some economists started questioning how the economy was being handled under Keynesian economics. Keynes was all about government intervention. Like, he believed that when economies were struggling, the government should step in and spend money to keep things moving. But then, economists like Friedrich Hayek and Milton Friedman were like, wait lang, this might be the best idea. They argued that governments were making a huge mistake by injecting so much money into the economy. Their logic was that it might boost demand for goods and services, but if supply doesn't increase along with it, prices just keep going up, aka inflation. And that's a problem kasi everything gets more expensive without actually fixing anything. Hayek and Friedman also believed that the government should step back and just let the market do its thing for them. The economy works best when businesses and consumers make their own choices without interference. They thought that when government got too involved, they actually mess things up instead of helping. This whose perspective eventually became known as neoliberalism. Fast forward to the 1980s, and this idea started gaining major traction. Like big deal institutions, think the US Treasury Department, the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, or IMF, and eventually the World Trade Organization, WTO, when it was established in 1995, were totally on board with it. They pushed for policies that would lower tariffs, basically taxes on imported goods, and create a more open global market. The set of economic policies that came from this shift was called the Washington Consensus. And it was a big deal from the 1980s all the way to the early 2000s. The whole bid was about encouraging countries to open up their economies, reduce government intervention, and let the market drive growth. Cutting government spending to reduce national debt, privatizing government services like water, power, communication, and transport, believing that private companies could do a better job than the government. Reducing tariffs and opening up economies, especially in developing countries, because they believe it would lead to faster economic growth. One thing that supporters of the Washington Consensus totally acknowledged was that some industries might struggle or even straight up disappear because of these policies. But for them, it was like a necessary shock. Parang top love. They believe that in the long run, it would actually be beneficial for the economy. Neoliberalism became super popular because, honestly, it sounded simple. Political leaders like US President Ronald Reagan and British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher were huge fans. They pushed the idea that a country should manage its finances kinda like a household. Like, don't spend too much para hindi malubog sa utang. Thatcher in particular really leaned into this whole mom managing the budget vibe. Parang she was the running economy the way a parent handles family expenses. But here's the thing. This household analogy, it doesn't exactly work for countries. Unlike families, government can actually print money, which obviously normal people can't do. Plus, they collect taxes, so they have a steady stream of income to help manage debt. Households don't have that kind of setup, so the comparison is kind of off. Basically, neoliberalism and the Washington Consensus were all about less control government, were more privatization and opening up markets. It seems like a solid plan, but critics were quick to point out na parang they were oversimplifying how economies actually work. And yeah, it did cause serious damage to certain industries. One of the clearest example of this, post-communist Russia in the 1990s, where the flaws of these policies became super obvious, super fast.
Russia's economic transition. In the 1990s, Russia followed the IMF's recommendation to rapidly privatize government industries. After the fall of communism. This process, known as shock therapy, was intended to transition the economy to a free market. However, this move allowed individuals who had gained wealth under communism to buy up state assets, leading to the rise of an oligarchy that still dominates the Russian economy. This case illustrates how neoliberal reform can entren economic inequality instead of fostering a dynamic free market economy. The gold standard refers to any monetary system of currency is linked to gold. Currently, there are no countries that use the gold standard under the Bretton Woods system. The U.S. was originally convertible to gold at a rate of $35 per ounce. By 1971, this convertibility was reversed. The 2007-2008 global financial crisis was triggered by the degradation of the U.S. housing market and the proliferation of subprime mortgages. High-risk loans issued to individuals with poor credit history. These mortgages were bundled into mortgage-backed securities or MBS, which were sold as investments. When housing prices, subpricing and homeowners defaulted on their loans, the value of these MBS plummeted. The collapse of major financial institutions like Lehman Brothers led a global recession. The crisis had a ripple effect worldwide, causing banks in the countries like Iceland to default and economic experience sharp contraction. The 2008 financial crisis, also known as the global financial crisis, was a major worldwide economic crisis centered in the United States. This triggered the Great Recession of late 2007 to mid-2009, the most severe downturn since the 1929 Wall Street crash and Great Depression. The catalyst for the GFC were falling U.S. house prices and rising number of borrowers unable to repay their loans. Lender of subprime mortgages had reversed incentive to bundle as part of this scheme mortgage-backed securities to other investors in order to profit from. Next. Economic globalization. Economic globalization had led to rapid global growth with global capital GDP rising fivefold in the second half of the 20th century. Large Asian economies such as China, Japan, and Singapore were key beneficiaries. In 2011, developing countries accounted for 51% of global exports compared to just 29% in earlier decades. However, economic globalization remains an uneven process with transnational corporation or TNC preparing most of the benefit. Economic globalization is the process of creating economic independence between countries. It's characterized by the movement of goods, services, capital, and technologies across borders. Economic globalization refers to the increasing independence of world economies as a result of the growing scale of cross-border trade of commodities and services. Flow of international capital and wide and rapid spread of technologies. Economic globalization is one of the three main dimensions of globalization, commonly found in academic literature. With the two other is political globalization and cultural globalization. as well as the general term of globalization. Economic globalization refers to the widespread international movement of goods, capital, services, and technologies and information. It is the increasing economic integration and independence of national, regional, and global economies across the world through an intensification of cross-border movement of goods, services, technologies, and capital. Next.
So let's move on to our next topic, the Philippine experience in global trade. Under the GATT system, the Philippine agriculture sectors really took a hit, especially because of ex- expert calls unfair trade deals, mostly with the super powerful countries like the US. Um, that's one big example of country literally use its influence under the GATT to stop Philippine export from buying local poultry and pork. Even though they were freely selling their own meat products here in the Philippines, um, like imagine the unfair competition our local industries had a deal with foreign product flooding the market while their own goods could even get the same access abroad. So, yun nga. Yung ibang mga countries, nakakapag-export sila dito sa Philippines ng madali. Samantalang yung mga product natin na made in Philippines is nahihirapan tayong i-export sa ibang bansa. Yun yung mga global experience ng Philippines na nagiging unfair trade talaga kasi. Let's move on. Now the Philippines was hoping that opening up trade under GATT would lead to gain in other areas like say coconut product to balance out the losses in the meat sectors. But that TBH, that didn't really happen. Take coconut export for example in 1993. They were worth 1.9 billion while there was a slight increase in 2.3 billion in 1997, by 2000 it was back to 1.9 billion. So even with effort to expand export, the country struggled to make real progress in some industries. But probably the most alarming part, according to Waldon Bello and his research team, is that the Philippines actually become net food importer. Under GATT, like in 1993, we had agricultural trade surplus of 292 million, meaning we were exporting more food than we were bringing in. But 1997, that flipped into 764 million deficit, and by 2002, it ballooned into 794 million. So instead of strengthening our agriculture sector, those trade policies made it harder for us to sustain local food production. So, long story short, the trade policies under GATT and WTO, which were pushed by those big powerful countries, ended up being major trade to keep up by expanding export in areas like coconut product. But the expected benefits didn't really materialize. Instead of boosting local production, we started importing more food than we exported. And those trade imbalance, they still make it super hard for local industries, especially those relying on agriculture to actually grow and compete. So yun, makikita naman natin ngayon, as in ngayon, yung sa rice natin, di ba? Example lang natin yung rice natin. Hindi natin sila nag-aano tayo, import lang tayo ng import dito sa countries natin. Hindi tayo nag-export kasi nga kinukulang rin tayo ng bigas. Parang nagkukulang na rin ng fund yung agriculture natin na mas palaguin yung agriculture tas mai-trade natin dun sa ibang bansa. Kuha lang tayo ng product sa ibang bansa, like sa US ngayon, example dito na big country siya na nakakapag-export sila sa iba't ibang bansa. So, yun. Siya, unfair trade nga talaga na yung bansa natin is naiiwan na sa exporting product. So, let's move on to the next topic. Next slide, please. So, the next slide is trade barriers and protectionism. So, trade barriers, protectionism. Take Japan refusal to allow rice imports. For example, Japan depends on its policy by saying rice is sacred and shall be protected from foreign competition. It's also a reflection of Japan's economic power as the world's third largest economy, which allows it to resist international pressure to open its agriculture sectors. Similarly, the United States has history of protecting its sugar industry, even if that means American consumers and sugar-dependent industries end up paying high price rather than benefiting from cheaper sugar import from Central America. So those protectionist practices create a double standard in global trade, where powerful countries protect their own industries while urging others to open up their market. For example, for poorer developing countries, it's difficult to challenge those unfair practices which leaves trade imbalance in place. So, yung trade barriers and protectionism is parang isa rin siyang unfair trade lang din na yung ibang yung in example dito na Japan and United States, yung sa Japan naman is yung sa rice, 'di ba? Parang ang unfair na hindi nila sinishare yung rice nila na sacred daw. Yung sa United States naman na yung sugar naman nila parang hindi sila nag-open nung barriers nila, samantalang yung ibang countries like Philippines ino-open nila na mai-share nila yung mga ganun, yung product nila tsaka yung mga hindi na-share yung mga idea, tas yung kung paano nila ginagawa yung mga rice tsaka yung sugar nila. Tas next slide. So the double standard in global trade. The main beneficiaries of global trade have been transnational corporation TNCs rather than the government of countries where those companies operate. TNCs prioritize profits over social welfare and are often willing to exploit weaker labor and environmental in poorer nations, lower their labor protection environmental laws to attract foreign investment. This leads to lower wages, weaker worker rights, and environmental damage. Countries may also deplete their natural resources such as oil, coal, and minerals in an effort to boost profits, leaving them vulnerable in the long run. In short, while economic globalization has led to significant growth, it hasn't been equally beneficial for all countries. While some developing nations have gathered from export, others are stuck in trade imbalance and face exploitation by multinational companies. The benefits of global trade often go to most powerful players, leaving small countries with little leverage to prove the fairness of the system. So, yun. Napag-iiwanan na talaga yung Philippines sa trading kasi mas iba yung pina-priority ng mga hindi ko naman linalahat mga nakaupo, ganun. Tapos sa conclusion naman, let's move on to the conclusion. So, conclusion, international economic integration plays a pivotal role in globalization. It's often because the focal point of this discussion about the phenomenon. However, it's important to remember that while economics is a significant aspect of globalization, it's not the entire picture. Globalization also involves cultural, political, and social dimensions that interact with are influenced by the economy. A prime example of this connection is how trade facilitates global culture. For instance, Filipinos would not be as familiar with American culture without the trade that makes it possible to watch American movies, listen to American music, and consume American products. In a similar way, global politics is deeply tied to trade. Many diplomatic and foreign policy events are shaped by effort to strengthen trading relationship between nations. Therefore, the economic ties between countries not only affect their financial growth but also their cultural and political change. Given the importance of economic globalization, it's crucial to constantly ask how the system can be made more just. While it may not be feasible to eliminate global free trade altogether, policymakers shall aim to make the trade agreement fairer, ensuring they don't disproportionately benefit only certain countries or groups. Furthermore, governments shall look for ways to protect the most vulnerable population from the negative impact of globalization. At the same time, it's important to find strategies that allow the benefits of economic globalization, such as to market, innovation, and growth opportunities to be distributed more equitably across different nations and communities. So, that's all about our report. Sana may natutunan kayo. Bye. Thank you.
Hi! Kamusta? The discussion has finally ended. But before we end this video presentation, we would like to give you a summary of the topic that we've discussed. So, here's a video of our groupmate, Miss Marilea Peñalosa.
What is economic globalization? Ang economic globalization ay isang koneksyon ng ekonomiya sa buong mundo sa pamamagitan ng kalakalan, pamumuhunan, at technology. Ayon sa International Monetary Fund or IMF, ito ay bunga ng pagsulong ng tao at inobasyon. Halimbawa, mas mabilis yung kalakalan, pagtaas ng dayuhan, at mga digital na product like e-books, online music, at iba pa. The history of international trade. Silk Road, 130 BCE, 1453 CE. Ang unang kilalang ruta ng kalakalan na nag-uunay sa China, Gitnang Silangan at Europe. Galleon Trade 1571, unang tunay na globalization, pinagbuklod ng Pilipinas at Mexico sa pamamagitan ng kalakalan. Mercantilism, 16th to 18th century, mahigpit na pinoprotektahan ng mga bansang Europe ang kanilang ekonomiya sa pamamagitan ng mataas na buwis at imported na product. Gold standard 1867, 1930s, sinabay na ng mga bansa ang halaga ng kanilang pera sa ginto na nagpadali sa kalakalan pero nagpalala na sa The Great Depression. Fiat money 1970s present, hindi na kailangan nakabase sa ginto ang halaga ng pera, kaya mas may control yung gobyerno sa money supply. Number 10, Neoliberalism and the Washington Consensus. Noong 1980s, tinulak ng IMF, World Bank at WTO ang concept ng free market o malayang pamilihan. Privatization, binebenta ng gobyerno ng mga pampublikong negosyo sa pribadong sektor. Pagbawas ng gastusin ng gobyerno, pinuputol ng pondo para sa edukasyon at healthcare para mahikayat ang mga dayuhang namumuhunan. Sa ibang bansa tulad ng Russia, lumobo ang mga yaman ng mayayaman habang lumalala ang mga kahirapan. Number 4, the 2008 financial crisis. Noong 1980s, tinulak ng IMF, World Bank at WTO ang concept ng free market o malayang pamilihan. Privatization, binebenta ng gobyerno ng mga pampublikong negosyo sa pribadong sektor. Pagbawas ng gastusin ng gobyerno, pinuputol ng pondo para sa edukasyon at healthcare para mahikayat ang mga dayuhang namumuhunan. Sa ibang bansa tulad ng Russia, lumobo ang mga yaman ng mayayaman habang lumalala ang mga kahirapan. Number 4, the 2008 financial crisis. Sa US, tinanggal ang mahigpit na regulation sa bank, kaya nagpautang sila ng walang ingat. Maraming tao ang hindi kayang bayaran ng kanilang utang sa bahay. Nang bumagsak ang presyo ng mga bahay, nalugi ang mga bangko na naging sanhi ng isang pandaigdigang crisis. Hanggang ngayon, may mga bansang di pa rin nakabangon tulad ng Greece at Spain. Economic globalization today. Lumakas na ang mga export ng mga developing countries tulad ng China at Pilipinas. Pero hindi pa rin patas ang kalakalan. Economic globalization today. Lumalakas ang mga export ng mga developing countries tulad ng China at Pilipinas. Pero hindi pa rin patas ang mga kalakalan. Mayamang bansa pinoprotektahan ang kanilang produkto tulad ng Japan, ayaw mag-import ng bigas. USA, may mga limitasyon ng pag-import ng asukal. Malalaking corporation lang ang tunay na mga nakikinabang, habang mahirap na bansa ay naghihirap dahil sa mahihinang batas sa labor at kalikasan. The Philippines experience. Nasaktan ng sektor ng agriculture ng Pilipinas dahil sa global trade deals. Di makapasok sa US market ang karne ng Pilipinas, pero sa USA ay malayang nagbebenta ng sarili nitong karne sa Pilipinas. Mataas ang pag-asa sa coconut export pero mababa pa rin ang kita. The Philippine experience. The Philippines suffered under global trade deals with its agriculture industry badly affected. Di makapasok sa US market ang karne ng Pilipinas, pero sa US ay malayang nagbebenta sa sarili nitong karne ang mga sa Pilipinas. Mataas ang pag-asa sa coconut export pero mababa pa rin ang kita. Isipin mo na para sa Shopee o Amazon nationwide, pero imbes na mga gadget at damit ang binebenta ay mga produkto na service ng mga bansa. Ito ay economic globalization. palitan ng produkto or service at pera at iba-iba pang sa iba't ibang parte ng mundo.